British Spy Stories. Season 3. Official Denial. Episode 3. Marjorie walks out of St John's Wood tube station, crosses the Finchley Road and disappears into the streets to the west of the highway. She turns into a solid red brick Victorian mansion block and walks up the stairs to the first floor. She takes a key from her bag and opens one of the doors on the landing and lets herself into number 17A, Carlisle Place. Immediately inside, a hallway with a deep red carpet stretches the entire length of the flat, from the small arched window that faces the road at the front to a conservatory at the back.
"Margie?"
a voice calls out.
"Hello, Mother."
Before going to see her mother, Marjorie goes into her bedroom, takes off her shoes and puts on slippers, then walks down to the conservatory. At the end of the red carpet, the house opens up into a glass-roofed pavilion that had been added in the 1920s. The room is crammed with plants. There's a low table and 4 wicker chairs scattered around the centre of the place. Lady Fiona Allardyce has a tightly permed helmet of grey hair and wears a trouser suit of dark blue. Her face is perfectly round, and her nearly black eyes crackle with energy behind wire-framed glasses.
"How are you, my dear?"
Marjorie kisses her mother on the cheek.
"I'm well. How's your foot?"
"It's nothing," says Lady Allardyce.
"I was reading about all this threat of war."
"Oh, yes."
"For my time in the service, I know that most so-called news you get put out carefully controlled when there's a war on. But there does seem to be a lot of detail in the reports, more than I would have thought was healthy to release."
"It's a different world now, Mother.
Before social media, you could control the flows. It's not like that nowadays. The troops on the ground all have camera phones."
"It can't do any good," says the old woman.
"It is how it is."
Lady Allardyce stops her train of thought and looks at her daughter.
"Bad day, my darling?"
"No," but her nerves are evident to her mother.
"When you were a teenager and I'd see you smoking at the bottom of the garden in our house in Wimbledon, you'd come back inside, and when I asked you if you'd been smoking, you said no, in exactly the same way as you did just now. You've always been a dreadful liar, Margie." "I'm okay. I'm just not in a talkative mood. I'll make dinner."
She walks out, back up the corridor and disappears into the kitchen. Lady Allardyce thinks about her daughter over the years and the half-dozen times that the girl has lied to her. By 10 o'clock they are both sitting in the lounge.
"You've been quiet all evening. I'm worried about you." "Don't be, Mum. It's just work."
"I do." A rare moment of honesty falls lightly into the void between them.
"You're bored, aren't you?"
says the old lady. Marjorie smiles at the woman.
"Well, you know me. You want promotion? What's the next level up?" "Head of operations for one sector." "You want that?"
says her mother.
"I don't know. Has there been a woman head of ops before?"
"No," says Marjorie.
"You used to be so ambitious, Margie. What happened?" "Before Dad died, I was." "Why did that change anything?" "I was put out to pasture,"
says Marjorie.
"They must have thought I had something to do with it." "You had nothing to do with your father's death,"
says Lady Allardyce. Marjorie shrugs.
"It still happened. You're not exactly old enough to retire, my girl. And you're an ops controller. People would kill for that job. I don't know. I'm going to bed."
She gets up and kisses her mother, then disappears up the corridor. Lady Allardyce pushes herself up from the armchair and walks over to a bookcase that sits on the back wall. The shelves are loaded with a mass of novels, encyclopedias, old magazines and newspapers. She thumbs through the volumes in front of her and finds A Tale of Two Cities. Lady Allardyce pulls it out and opens the volume. Inside the hollowed-out book is an old mobile phone. She picks it out, replaces the book, and walks to the conservatory. Being careful to shut the door to the rest of the house before she does anything else. She pushes the power button on the device and waits for it to come alive. When the lights come on, she goes to the stored numbers and presses the only number in there, muttering to herself about the smallness of the buttons as she does so. She puts the phone up to her ear.
Bernard? Fiona?
It's been a long time, Fee.
Our friend is becoming restless, Bernard.
You think something has happened?
She's different. There's something there. I don't know what yet, but I just thought you should be aware. Tell Connie.
I will. Thank you, Fee, he says. Keep me across how she is. You know the score. I don't need to tell you what to look for.
Shall we have lunch, Bernard? Next week. Location Beta 3.
My favourite place for lunch, he says. Wednesday at 1.
I'll see you there.
Across London in Vauxhall Cross, Sir Bernard replaces the receiver of the telephone on his desk. He pulls open a drawer in one of the side pedestals and brings out a folder. He picks it up and walks to the windows that give him a wide view of the Thames. The ice clinks into the glass, and he pours a gin and tonic from his small collection of bottles. Sir Bernard settles into a high-back swivel chair near the window and opens the folder resting on his knee to refresh his memory about Marjorie Allardyce. Before she became operations controller for MI5, Marjorie Allardyce was educated at the top girls' private school, Rodine, then Cambridge University. In her first year at Cambridge, she'd slept with her professor, but just after the start of Michaelmas term the following year, they had had an almighty argument, and Marjorie got the woman sacked. Despite all of that, she went on to gain a first in economics. Marjorie was officially approached by the British Intelligence Service's recruitment branch to join MI6 when she was 25. They had spotted her at Cambridge and kept track of her life and career. During several very successful years in MI6, she rose through the organisation at tremendous speed, then moved to MI5 after her father tragically died. She needed to cut down on her travel so that she could look after her ageing mother, although Fiona Allardyce hardly needs looking after, he thinks. 2 years later, the file reveals, Marjorie started talking to some Russian friends of hers, and a year after that she was turned by the SVR to be a full Russian agent. British intelligence had tracked every move and knew that her loyalties had shifted from the outset. Sir Bernard and his parallel in MI5, Connie Barrett, allocated her to be a dum-dum route, as it is known in the security services. It's the standard procedure for managing people in British intelligence who also work for other countries. Dum-dums are given false information that they unwittingly feed directly to foreign powers, whether enemies or allies. Sir Bernard flicks over the page. Espionage runs in the Allardyce family. Marjorie's mother, Lady Fiona Allardyce, was one of the most successful British spies in the 1960s. When Fiona was in her 20s, she had been the honey trap in 1963 that resulted in the exposure of Kim Philby, the most notorious British-Russian double agent of the era. Sir Bernard takes a sip of gin and starts to think if the time is right to do something about this particular dum-dum. And he knows that Lady Allardyce will be central to whatever plan that he decides on. Taras checks his watch. 5 minutes before the truck is due to arrive. He leans back in the seat of his Mercedes, so his face is away from the arc lamps outside. Today would have been his mother's birthday, he thinks. Her face is still crystal clear in the memories of his childhood. When his father had left them, Taras was 2, and his mother barely mentioned him after that day. Even when Taras was a teenager and went through a phase of asking every day about his dad, she had remained resolutely silent. When they got the news that he had died, it was the only day that Taras can remember seeing his mother cry. Their farm in Zawi was right up near where the three borders of Hungary, Slovakia, and Ukraine meet. He and his sister would walk 2 miles to the school when they got older. Whenever they arrived home at the end of the day, their mother would be in the fields that surrounded their cottage, tending winter wheat or spring barley. It had all seemed so simple, but he knows now that his mother had to fight for everything to keep the three of them alive. By the time he was 18, Taras was an angry young man. He was angry about his father and how his mother had suffered. All through his schooling, his friends had split into pro-Russian or pro-Western, and would fight on a Saturday night, after stealing vodka from old Mr. Shevchuk's shop. He had fallen in love with Lara Kozlov when they were both 15, but her father was Russian and tried to put a stop to their relationship. When Lara was sent to Moscow to study, it was the final straw, and Taras had kissed his mother goodbye and taken the bus to Budapest. He had no job and no skills, and that's when he first got involved with crime. The headlights of the truck cross his eyes, and he is snapped out of his memories. Taras grabs the door handle and steps out into the night air. He pulls on a black woolen hat and walks over to the group of men as they emerge from the lorry. "Did you deal with security guards on the main road?" he says, and the others nod. "Come on then. We need to move." Taras orders them to back the truck up to the loading bay, and one of the men jumps the ignition of a forklift. The others swing open the vast back doors of the trailer, and Taras watches them gradually move a stream of wooden crates into the back of the vehicle. He checks that they are pushing each one far forward, so that they can fit as many in as possible. After 40 minutes, the crates are right up to the back door, and Taras calls to the men to close it all up and get back on the road. "When you get to the warehouse," he says to the driver, "Volya will be there, and tell you where to unload." The guy nods, and the red taillights of the truck flicker on as he starts the engine. The vehicle rolls out of the yard, and Taras watches it disappear around the bend in the access road that leads back to the highway. He lowers himself into the Mercedes and starts to follow the same route as his men. As he reaches the main road, his headlights illuminate the bodies of the 2 security guards lying on the far side of the tarmac. His eyes are only on the corpses for a second, but he's sure he sees one of them move. Taras stops his car but leaves his headlights on and steps out. He walks over to the bodies, and dust from the road flicks up onto his Italian leather shoes. He inspects the men and pushes them with his foot. The corpses roll, then fall back to earth. He must have been wrong. He must have been seeing things. Taras turns back to the car and is halfway across the carriageway when he hears the click of a safety catch coming off. He turns in less than a second, pulling his handgun out from the back of his trousers, but he's not quick enough to stop the man releasing a shot. Taras returns fire and the man slumps backwards. Then a roar of pain explodes in his shin. His leg gives way before he thinks about it, and he hits the road heavily. He grabs for his leg, willing the pain to stop. He can see a red pool of blood spreading out across the expensive fabric of his suit, and he lets out a cry that sounds like the wolves he heard as a child as he lay in bed in Zaoni. Taras doesn't know how long he's been lying here, in the dirt. He thinks he has remained conscious but can't be sure. When the pain is bearable, he grabs at the fabric of his trousers and tears a strip off. He struggles but manages eventually to wrap the fabric around his leg and pull it tight, and it reduces the pain from excruciating to agonizing. Inside his head, he battles between the all-enveloping pain and the knowledge that he must move soon or die here on the road. When he eventually lifts his body up, his wound starts to throb, but he ignores it and hobbles back to the Mercedes. He slumps in the seat, out of breath from the exertion. He turns the ignition and swears as he has to put on his seatbelt to stop the alarm going off. He engages drive and pushes with his wrong foot on the accelerator. As the car starts to move, he can feel the blood dripping down his leg and onto the carpet in the footwell. Taras drives back to the city, then through the empty streets of Budapest, the pain pounding in his leg around the bloody gash. The Mercedes descends into the car park under the flats. He stops the engine and slowly leans over until he can reach his phone on the passenger seat. His breathing is coming in short bursts now. He dials the stored number for Nadia, and when she answers, all he can say is,
"I'm in the car park. I need you."